Hey guys, today we'll be taking a look at the results of the latest 2022 midterm primary elections, and the reason why I waited off a couple of days is because I wanted to wait until that Pennsylvania race would end, where currently Mehmet Oz is expected to win the GOP nomination for the Senate to challenge John Fetterman. So I did want to wait a couple of days just to get these results to be a little bit more concrete. Although voting is not over, Mehmet Oz is only leading over David McCormick currently by just 1,000 votes, and we still have a recount that is inevitable, although I will go further into that recount in a couple of moments here. So looking at the 2022 midterm primary calendar, on May 17th, we had 5 races. This is the most we've had in a single day so far, with races in the states of Idaho, Kentucky, North Carolina, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. And you'll see, of course, by that yellow circle there that there were quite a few open seats. And of course, in the 2 more Republican states, we have many Republican incumbents in those major races. So I want to start off by taking a look at the latest race we've seen in the state of Pennsylvania. And this is the big one here, the Republican primary for the Senate nomination in the state of Pennsylvania. Mehmet Oz currently at 31.2% of the vote, David McCormick at 31.1%, and Kathy Barnett actually playing a major spoiler role here for Mehmet Oz at 24.7%. On the Democratic side, of course, John Fetterman easily won this nomination with 744,000 votes, well ahead of Connor Lamb, who at one point had a pretty good chance at winning this race, although John Fetterman, the current incumbent lieutenant governor of the state of Pennsylvania, came out on top, winning every single county. On the Republican side, of course, it is a lot more divided, and so looking at this race, the 2022 GOP nomination, you'll see that honestly this race was pretty good for every single candidate involved. Mehmet Oz at one point was expected to lose this race in terms of many polls that we saw consecutively. So at one point, Mehmet Oz was not really even expected to win. However, in the last couple of weeks, he has gained a huge amount of support. He does have the endorsement of Donald Trump. David McCormick, of course, had some pretty abysmal polling numbers at the very end. He never, ever really polled in the upper 20% range, and in the end, he ended up with over 31% of the vote. And for Kathy Barnett, I mean, she really did not gain support until the very end. She is that red line right there. Kathy Barnett never really gained that much support until the last couple of weeks, along with Mehmet Oz, who also overtook David McCormick. At one point, David McCormick was expected to win this nomination, and if you just look at the betting odds here, David McCormick had a very good chance. At one point, his betting odds were up at 79 cents per share. At one point, he had a 4 in 5 chance of winning this nomination. Mehmet Oz, at one point, had a less than 20% chance at winning just a couple of months ago. Of course, Mehmet Oz joined this race after Sean Parnell dropped out because of issues with his wife and just a whole scandal there. He did initially have the support of Donald Trump, but then Trump turned on and instead nominated Mehmet Oz, who joined after Parnell withdrew from the race. And so I think that this race was, is definitely obviously the closest one, but I think that it does say a lot about how split the Republican Party is. Mehmet Oz is the Trump-endorsed candidate, and he only received 31% of the vote. And Kathy Barnett really took many votes away from Mehmet Oz. If Kathy Barnett did not have that surge, I think that it would be a clear victory for Mehmet Oz at this point. And basically all the votes have essentially been counted at this point. I believe there are still like 2,000 mail-in ballots, but there's no way David McCormick is going to win by that much of a margin, any significant margin, enough to actually give him the victory. And in the end, Mehmet Oz is probably going to win. There will be a recount. It will be an automatic recount because, of course, the numbers are within 0.5%. However, recounts don't normally ever see a difference of over 1,000 votes. You might see a couple hundred, tens of votes in a recount change, a change of a couple hundred votes max in a recount. But to see David McCormick win after a recount, gaining over 1,000 votes that were counted incorrectly, that is very, very rare and very, very unlikely to happen. So at this point, Mehmet Oz is expected to be the Republican nominee for Senate. And if you look at this race overall against John Fetterman, of course, was expected to win, basically since the very beginning. And so I think that John Fetterman now is in a better position than he was before, just because of the fact that I think Mehmet Oz is not the strongest candidate. I do think that David McCormick on a statewide level would perform better against John Fetterman than Mehmet Oz would. However, of course, Mehmet Oz is going to end up being the nominee. And so this race, by all accounts, is a toss-up race. You do have one saying that it is tilt for the Republican Party. This, of course, is a seat that is currently held by the GOP, and this will be one of the most important races to determine the balance of power in the Senate. The Democrats currently holding 46 seats, the Republicans 47, with basically the solid and likely states filled in. With the state of Pennsylvania, the Democratic Party could afford to lose one other seat. Of course, currently there is a 50-50 Senate, so the Democrats must hold on to their 4 seats in New Hampshire, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. However, if they can get a win in Pennsylvania, they can lose in one of these other seats that they currently hold. New Hampshire, I think, is the least vulnerable currently. I think that Arizona, Mark Kelly is relatively safe compared to Warnock and Cortez Masto, but I think that, in my opinion right now, Catherine Cortez Masto is the weakest candidate, and so if the Democrats can't pick up Pennsylvania, they can afford to lose Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, and so Pennsylvania is really the only very weak seat for the Republicans, as Pat Toomey, the incumbent Republican, is retiring. Now, looking at the governor election in the state of Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano has won the Republican primary. This is not good for the Republican Party. Doug Mastriano is, of course, a far-right candidate. He did get the very late endorsement of Donald Trump, so you do have, another Trump candidate winning. Mehmet Oz was also as well, although by a much, much smaller margin. Lou Barletta is what most Republicans, the establishment wanted, but Mastriano, performed very, very well in many regions of the country. He won both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So the Republicans are going to have a hard time, though. Douglas Mastriano is very much to the right, and he is not exactly the most electable candidate in a very moderate state like Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania being one of the most contested races in basically every single election at this point. It's always on that toss-up list, and so independents are very likely to not be swayed towards Mastriano. On the Democratic side, Josh Shapiro did run uncontested. He is the incumbent Attorney General of the state. Of course, Mastriano is a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate. So Josh Shapiro, I think, is right now going to actually defeat Douglas Mastriano. I think that just because of Mastriano's win, the Democratic Party has a very slight advantage, so I'm going to categorize that as tilt now for the Democratic Party. Of course, the incumbent is Tom Wolf, who cannot run for re-election. He won his last election with 58% of the vote. So the Democratic Party does come into this race with quite an advantage, although 2022 is expected to be a red wave year. So you have Josh Shapiro and Doug Mastriano, and I think that gubernatorial elections, just as a whole, are much more likely to vote for the party that isn't really doing the best nationwide. So, for example, of course, the Democratic Party right now is struggling in those Senate races, in those House races, but on the gubernatorial level, it is much more likely for a Republican to vote for a Democrat than on the Senate level, because statewide politics really does not have that much of an effect in terms of party affiliation, which, of course, does determine the balance of power in Congress in Washington, but electing a Democratic governor is not on that same sort of level. Candidates are, voters are much more inclined to actually vote for who they support more, more over their actual party support. So looking at the results here, looking at the turnout for these races, I think that it is an okay sign for the Democratic Party. Of course, Democrats vote less in these midterm elections as well as these primary elections, so we did get an expected larger amount of votes from the Republican primary. However, you do have to consider the fact that the Democratic primary races were a lot less exciting. If you look, John Fetterman winning every single county, whereas, on the Senate level for the Republicans, Mehmet Oz winning by just 0.1%. You also had a big governor election because, of course, many Republicans were very much against Doug Mastriano winning this race, and the vote was split by many candidates, against Mastriano. So and that definitely did have a big effect. And, on the Democratic side for governor, there wasn't even a race. Josh Shapiro basically won uncontested. So, the race was a lot more exciting for the Republicans. There was a lot more to vote for, and so that's why they had much higher turnout by a little bit less than 100,000 votes. I think that in November it will be very, very close in both of these races, but I think that the night overall in Pennsylvania was a positive for the Democrats, as they were able to get Republicans that would perform worse in a general election to win, while of course Democrats retained their frontrunner candidates who won by some very strong margins. Now, looking at the races that we saw in North Carolina for the Senate, Cheri Beasley winning the Democratic primary with 81% of the vote. Not surprising at all. Of course, no other candidate even topped 4%. On the Republican side, Ted Budd defeated former Governor Pat McCrory with 59% of the vote. Of course, Pat McCrory is the Republican governor that lost his re-election to Roy Cooper, and so obviously that was not going to help his campaign, that he was a gubernatorial loser in a state that favored the Republican Party very much. He actually lost in 2016, which is, of course, or not 2016, 2017, which is, of course, when... Actually, no, 2016 was when Pat McCrory lost, and that was the same year that Trump won the state by, I believe, over 3%. So Ted Budd winning 59% of the vote is not too surprising. Mark Walker, the former frontrunner, only winning 9.2% of the vote. So I think that this primary, does show that the Republican Party is pretty much very well behind Ted Budd, and I think that this is, the turnout is obviously not good for the Democratic Party, but Cheri Beasley, of course, was in a very uncontested race, but in the end, I think that North Carolina is not going to be too contested. I think that the Republicans have a clear advantage in this race. On the Senate level, there was no primary for governor because there is no election for governor this year in North Carolina, but Cheri Beasley, I think that she is going to have a very tough election ahead of her. If you look at the 2022 race, this is because Richard Burr is retiring. That's why he had both a Democratic and Republican primary. But just looking at, what we've seen here, the polling for this general election between Budd and Beasley, Ted Budd has led in every single poll that has been released, except for one where they were tied. And I mean, these are not very small margins. These are quite significant margins. This one where Budd was up by 7% from Emerson College. So I think that Ted Budd is in a very good position to win his race in November. Cheri Beasley, she is going to struggle. I think that, this race is not going to be one of those deciding ones. I think Republicans are going to pretty easily hold on to it. I think races in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada are going to be a lot closer. And, speaking of Georgia, we do have a primary in Georgia in just a couple of days. On May 24th, we will have primaries in Alaska, Arkansas, and Georgia. Georgia being, of course, the big one there, with incumbent Raphael Warnock attempting to win his renomination, as well as Herschel Walker on the Republican side. And in California, of course, we have, 7 major races in in early June. So, in just a couple of weeks. We also have Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota. So June 7th, we will have a slew of primaries with really no very important races. I think that all of these are going to be incumbents winning their re-elections, or, the frontrunner candidates winning. So June 7th, I don't think it's going to see too many exciting races. But to close out this video, I do want to take a look at the other results that we saw on Tuesday night. Starting off with the state of Oregon, Ron Wyden winning his re-election. He is the incumbent Democratic senator, so of course he is going to win that Democratic primary pretty easily with almost 90% of the vote. Jo Ray Perkins is expected to win on the Republican side, although we only do have 83% reporting for this Republican primary. And for the governor race, Tina Kotek is expected to replace Kate Brown on the Democratic ticket for governor. Kate Brown, of course, has had some pretty abysmal approval numbers. However, Tina Kotek is going to front that Democratic ticket now, and I think that in the end, she still will end up on top. And Christine Drazan for the Republicans in the state of Oregon. However, of course, this race is one the Democratic Party is widely expected to win, both of them. As you can see, the Democratic Party did have significantly higher turnout in both of these races. Of course, it is a Democratic state. And in the state of Idaho, David Roth winning the Democratic primary for the Democratic Senate nomination. Mike Crapo, the incumbent Republican, winning it for the Republicans, of course, winning 67% of the vote. Not really the strongest performance for such, for an incumbent Republican in a state that has voted for him for a very long time. And there is a governor race. Brad Little does win his nomination, 53% of the vote, even though his lieutenant governor was endorsed by Donald Trump to challenge him, because Brad Little is not exactly the most pro-Trump governor. However, the lieutenant governor race is a separate one. That's why, the lieutenant governor would run against Brad Little. On the Democratic side, Stephen Haidt wins uncontested. So, not a very exciting primary in Idaho, but we are widely expected to see these Republican victories. I mean, 33,000 votes on the Democratic side, 265 on the Republican side. That's really all you got to say. The Republican Party is going to dominate in Idaho once again. And in the state of Kentucky, Charles Booker wins the Democratic nomination. This is not surprising at all. Charles Booker was widely expected to win. He, of course, lost to Amy McGrath, who challenged Mitch McConnell in 2020 in Kentucky. But now Charles Booker will win that Democratic nomination and challenge Rand Paul, who I think will be even more difficult to win against, because Rand Paul is not nearly as unpopular or, as hated as Mitch McConnell, with 86% of support from his own party. So Rand Paul winning his re-election, Charles Booker winning his nomination. I think that the Kentucky race, of course, will not be very exciting at all, with Rand Paul absolutely destroying Charles Booker. But the turnout is a little bit better here from the Democratic Party, with almost 300,000. It's not the 33,000 that we saw there in Idaho. There is no Republican primary in this race, but there's no gubernatorial primary in the state of Kentucky, because of course there will be no governor election. And so something else that I do want to take a look at is the race with Matthew Cawthorn. Matthew Cawthorn lost to Chuck Edwards in the primary for the 11th district for the Republican nomination here. This was definitely a very big deal. Madison Cawthorn was in a lot of scandals over the last couple of months. He did get the nomination or the support of Donald Trump. He did get Trump's endorsement, but he did end up, of course, losing by a pretty small margin. But for an incumbent, he is probably going to be the only incumbent to lose their renomination against a non-incumbent, because, of course, in many states that are losing electoral votes or having their district reshuffled, we will have incumbents running against incumbents. But I think that Madison Cawthorn will really only be the only incumbent to lose to a non-incumbent challenger, and so I think that, of course, is pretty embarrassing. But with only 33% of the vote, Chuck Edwards is expected to win this primary, and he will probably win a seat in the House. Madison Cawthorn is not really relenting. He is trying to fight back, but I do think that his attempts will really fizzle out. Madison Cawthorn, of course, is being the youngest member of the House at one point. I believe he still may be now, but he is the first member of the House of Representatives to be elected that was born in the 1990s. So Madison Cawthorn, I think, is going to fade away in the coming months. I don't think that he's really going to be a big deal in the Republican Party. As you can see, his party doesn't even really like him, even though he got the support by Donald Trump, of course, the patriarch of the party at this point in time. So I think that the primary results as a whole in North Carolina, Oregon, Idaho, and Kentucky really don't tell us too much. I think that the expected parties are going to win, Democrats in Oregon and Republicans in the other three. But in the races in Pennsylvania, these two are going to be very, very close. I think these numbers are favorable for the Democratic Party. John Fetterman is the best candidate Democrats could have put up. Mehmet Oz is one of the weaker ones, while on the governor level, Doug Matriano by far the worst candidate, and Republicans know that. Even Trump admitted to that, while on the Democratic side, Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General, I think that he would make a relatively good candidate. So overall, this was, a little bit of a net positive for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, where they are really needing a win there this November. And so, yeah, I will cover these other races as we see results in the coming weeks. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our channel if you have not. Comment down below which races you're watching, as well as how you feel about Mehmet Oz winning the GOP primary, Matthew Cawthorn losing his race. Join my Discord server if you haven't, link at the very top of the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.